Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Ironis Insights. We got a great guest here today, Andrew Kroeger, who's co-founder of CypherBlk. Andrew, thank you for coming. Where are you calling from today?
So I'm based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. And Alex, great to see you again.
Yeah,
Excited to be part of the podcast and just to have a conversation.
exactly, man. Let's see how it flows. Really appreciate you coming to my hometown in New York last week and checking it out. Um, Looking forward to hearing about what you have to say. So, I guess what got you into this business and what you're doing?
Yeah, and honestly, it wasn't part of the plan, right? But I'm fascinated by it. And I always love sharing kind of the juxtaposition as to where I'm at today versus when I first came in this industry. Because as you and I talked about last time, I come from a VAR background that eventually went into advanced technologies, data center, and cybersecurity. And when we are first world Americans, right, or a lot of the first world producers that are out there, we aren't exposed to actually the dark side of technology and the implications. So consequently, one of the CEOs that I worked with in cybersecurity about 10 years ago asked me to come on board to a company where he had become the CEO called Blanco. And I was like, well, what do you guys do? And he's like, we do data sensitization of retired IT assets. And immediately my first thought was, that sounds boring as crap. I had zero interest, right? Because I had been putting in all these cool blinking lights and data centers and fascinated by seeing all the new technology. And I loved what technology can do for business from an implication standpoint. So for me, that was exciting. And consequently, when I was offered to do this, I had to learn a little bit more, and then decided to take a leap of faith. But consequently, it wasn't only but until I took that leap of faith that I had to start pulling the thread and saying, where does this go? And, having been involved in cybersecurity, it was always about the fact that these higher levels of, threats that would come in from, bad actors or inside actors, right, that were looking to basically gain access to your data or perhaps prevent you to have access to the data. And in the end, that's really what it's all about when you're looking at security. And that was really kind of the cornerstone that enables the industry that I'm in today, which deals with circularity and technology reuse. And we don't really think of it as anything sexy, back then, especially. It's just like, get rid of the product. If you had a 3-year refresh, I was super excited, right? Like I'm that much closer to quota, like new technology, new blinking lights, awesome. What happened with the other stuff? Out of sight, out of mind. Well, when I came into this space, I was forced to look at what the implications of that are. And, certainly there are, the narratives as to, you know, one man's trash is another person's treasure. And I will tell you, this industry was really founded by brokers that were like, I can take that and make money on it. That isn't how this industry has evolved to today, right? The industry that we're involved in today is really C-suite level discussions, but what we do find is there's not really a lot of the players in our industry, and they're slowly starting to evolve that have the ability and the business acumen to have that conversation with the C-suite. Because it used to just be this transactional, I buy for X, I sell for Y, that's my profit. These days, and how it's evolved, it is at the forefront, of the public domain, right? So certainly we know about the environmental, implications, right? We all hear about ESG, carbon credits, and all these types of things. A lot of those things are out there in the ether, right? But even these days, you're talking about national security, right? And earlier this year, I was actually, because of the work that I do in this space, I was actually brought on by DARPA as an embedded entrepreneur to talk about how do we get rare earths out of e-waste, right? And that is the really interesting part about this industry is none of this circularity, none of these higher level, value initiatives um, will ever come true unless you actually ensure the integrity that that data is off that device, right? So that comes back down to the data sanitization, right? And not just the data sanitization, having to remove it and to have, the proper audit controls, security requirements, governance, everything that's associated with it, but only then can you start to get into these higher value initiatives that talk about how does this actually go back into the circular economy? At what point in time? Do you repair it? Do you refurbish it? Is it higher value here in this particular region versus that particular region? What are the needs? And really to start leaning into conscious consumerism and making sure that people aren't just always buying new, and it's really educating the world and society. When it first started, it used to be this narrative of, you know what, if you can't buy new, buy this. That's not where we're at today. It's really about right sizing for your needs, of today,
Hmm.
understanding the implications. And, the one thing that people can truly understand is scale sometimes, right? So here I am talking about the implications and impact and everything, but we don't really have anything to grab onto just as of now, right? Between you and I in this conversation. So one metric that tends to resonate with people is, well, I'm going to ask you a question again, is guess how much e-waste is produced every year?
Yeah.
62 million metric tons. And if you're like me and just like you right now, you're like, that sounds like a lot, right? You're like, you don't even understand what that means. Every
Right.
year, it's equivalent to the Great Wall of China
Yeah.
being crumbled up, thrown into landfills. And what are the implications of that? First off, you have to look at the human toll because we don't deal with it over here in the US. We send it to poor third world countries. And by the way, they have entire communities decimated by this,
Now with
where
e-waste, can you just tell us exactly what you're talking about?
yeah, so e-waste is kind of when you have that technology turnover
Mhm.
and people just, because maybe there's a lack of tools, understanding, whatever, they just want to get rid of it, right?
Mhm.
So they have depreciated it fully off the books. They just want to get rid of it, right? So that's what happens. And less than 20% of technology these days is recycled.
Mhm.
So 80% of it is out of sight, out of mind,
Mhm.
going into poor countries where they are burning, this stuff, and you have families, child labor, everyone trying to actually harvest the precious metals, critical minerals to do recycling on their side, burning the rest. And the amount of toxic, impact it has in the air, soil, water is huge. So there's a human toll of that, right? But conversely, when you actually are burning and not using that stuff judiciously, well, now you actually have to go and get new raw materials, out of the earth, right? And a lot of that is done by artisanal labors, which are child labors in third world countries, right? Over in China, which, by the way, right now controls supply chains. So China actually oversees about 90% of the necessary precious metals, rare earths, critical minerals that are going into new technology. So from a national stage, and like our administration today, they're very concerned about the fact that we have a lack of supply chain resiliency because we're building all these data centers, which you and I know, right? Where I live in Phoenix, it is the second biggest data center,
Yeah.
area there is in the US. So if we actually talk about restrictions like, oh, China, you can't have any semiconductors, they're like, cool toys, how are you going to build them? Well, we're relying on the raw ingredients to actually bake the cake, you
Mhm.
know. And the first thing that we have to do is just be responsible with how we actually manage technology today, right? And I'm not saying that we're not going to continue to consume technology. We are, but guess what? So is the rest of the world. Those third world countries are trying to be second world countries, to be first world countries. So the amount of new technology that's going into Africa, Asia, traditionally third world countries is huge. And all of them are going to be vying for those raw materials to actually produce new technology. So, as a country, as an individual, as people, we have to be conscious consumers and say, you know what? I may not be able to solve all that, but what I have to do is start managing our technology like the piece of equipment you and I are talking on right now to what happens to this after 3 years.
Mhm.
You know, if you're like me and like a lot of the people in the world, you probably have 3 or 4 different cell phones in a drawer, right? You might have your old laptops, not know what to do with it. I was working with NASA earlier this year. NASA just has volumes of IT equipment stuffed in the back because they're concerned about how you decommission it. So again, we can actually, and this is one of the things that we do with our technology, is we look at global supply chains, right? So we infuse all kinds of data points that come in to say, all right, what do I do with this particular asset at this particular time? And what does the downstream look like? So at the very beginning, and tying this back into a security thing, which is really your forte, is none of that can happen unless you've removed the data off the device and actually given reassurances. When our industry first started, you used to have a bunch of IT managers who are like, hey, you know what? This is kind of cool. I can sell this person over here my old technology. It's $50,000 incremental budget that I have that isn't on the budget. So it becomes a slush fund. And they're like, then I can go ahead and spin up new projects. And there might have been some bribes or kickbacks or whatever, right? But fast forward, then you started to have the CISO get involved. They're like, we can't have that, right? Because there's data breaches starting to happen and massive breaches, if you were to look it up, and huge impact in tolls on companies. So the CISO got involved, and the CISO's like, I want you to destroy everything,
Hmm.
right? There's going to be nothing leaving here. And then eventually, these days, as it starts to progress, now you have people, and now you have like scope one, scope two, scope three emissions. You have chief sustainability officers, and what you also have is governance that's out there that's driving these things. And they're actually concerned about, all right, carbon credits and how do I get my hands around this and show that we are a good corporate citizen in both the environmental, sustainable, as well as governance perspectives. And you hear things like closing the digital divide, right? But the nice part is these days when you have software is beautiful, right? Software can actually keep the value of that asset and understand how you disposition it safely. So all these people that had conflicting values, you can be like, hey, let's all have a seat at the table, right? All of you guys can meet your goals and accomplish the same things. And one of the very interesting parts, whereas our current administration could care less about environmental impact, but what a lot of people don't know is California SB 253 is coming out at the beginning of next year. And SB 253 means you have to manage your scope three emissions. And if you don't understand scope three emissions, right, a lot of people in our industry don't. So scope one and scope two are pretty measurable, right? Scope three is what my entire value chain is producing.
Hmm.
So if we think about that laptop, and if you and I both need a laptop, Alex, we can both go buy new ones, right? Well, what did it take from those minerals coming out of the ground to ultimately produce that laptop? That's a scope three emission,
Hmm.
right? So it's not just me, my direct responsibility. I'm responsible for all that upstream as well. But if what we do is we take a 3-year-old laptop that's been depreciated off of a company's books and we say, hey, there are people in the world that are going to use this, that I can go ahead and optimize this, make sure the data's gone, make sure the diagnostics and everything's working on this laptop correctly. If there's things that need repaired, great. If I need to do some cosmetic refurbishment, great. Well, if I'm able to maintain that into the secondary economy and the circular economy, then that's actually a 90% greenhouse gas savings emissions. And what we can actually do is capture that data point, pull it down. So all that, a lot of times people are looking out there, carbon credits, and how do I actually manage all these things, right? And I've got to actually do this for governance and whatever. When you just say, hey, let's just look inside our own house, if I look at all the technology that I'm consuming or Ironis is consuming, think about your laptops, right? Your desktops, your technology infrastructure. It's also why a lot of people are going to the cloud. And what's that impact, right? Well, that is a way that we can actually manage things, very easily, and at least pull down that piece of it that can come in to your company strategy when it comes to managing these types of things. And with California SB 253, just to put it in perspective, what that says is if you are a company in the US and you are doing more than $500 million in annual business, and you do any business in California, then you have to start reporting on scope three emissions.
Hmm.
That is huge
Hmm.
because a lot of people have no clue how to get there. It's
Hmm.
a massive initiative that's coming fast, in 2027 now. And along those lines, people need ways to solve that problems. So this is just one aspect of doing it. So again, I don't really care what your motivation or your driver is. Is it value reclamation? Cool. Fine, let's enable that, right? Are you concerned about the environment? Are you concerned about closing the digital divide? If I have 500 laptops coming off lease, well, can I go support a community of underprivileged that's passionate to me? I sit on the board of cell phones for soldiers, right? Can we actually take these 500 cell phones, give them to veterans who are at risk, right? To actually give them a way to be productive members of society, connected, get the help they need.
Hmm.
And so that is the beautiful part about this whole industry is we literally can create a better world, solve some problems. And really, as we look to kind of be conscious consumers, like, yes, we're going to need to continue bringing stuff out of the earth, right? But how can we actually be responsible with the technology we have today to understand that it's just not wasted, ended up in those landfills and all those impacted narratives? And that's why I'm fascinated by where I'm at today because I have such a passion for the work that we do and being able to collaborate with the right people. Because when people talk to me, they say, well, what do? I could say software, but I literally just kind of say tongue in cheek, and I'm like, just trying to save the world,
Yeah.
you know. But there's such truth in it, right? And
Yeah.
the impact, and who do I get to collaborate with to help this happen, right? And that's why I appreciate this opportunity to connect with
Yeah.
you, because look, most people are like me 10 years ago. I was forced to look at this. I had no desire. So the opportunity to educate people, which is one of my big roles, and I do a lot of global public speaking on this, is something that I just cherish,
Yeah.
right? And I appreciate you giving us the platform to have a conversation on it.
No, of course. Thanks. I mean, thanks so much for hopping on. It's fascinating. I mean, the work you're doing really is, uh, it's incredible, and it is really going to make a big difference out there. And what I'm curious is you mentioned companies 500 million and above. Now, is this the only type of companies that you're targeting right now to help? I mean, obviously, it's a good place to start, right? Because they have the most waste. But
Yeah, no, not at all, actually. And there is an entire economy, an industry that's built around the secondary economy, right?
Mhm.
And reverse logistics. I mean, look, you've seen the way that Amazon is today. So it is really a lot of the big logistics, a lot of big connectors that, when our softwares are actually getting deployed, typically we're dealing with people that are processing hundreds of thousands, even millions of these assets annually. And how do you operationalize this and do it at scale? It's not so much targeting the individual consumers. So it's really businesses or, the likes of, I'll tell you from a mobile standpoint, the carriers, right?
Yeah,
So you've been enticed by a carrier offer,
yeah,
right? T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon. Well, you're probably accustomed to going in and saying, all right, here's my old phone, give me the new one.
yeah.
Awesome. I'm ready for the latest and
I
greatest.
just did
Well,
it.
yeah. Well, what happened with that phone of yours?
I don't know. AT&T
Exactly.
has it.
That's exactly right. Well, I can tell you exactly what happened, with that, because I have the ability to work with AT&T, right?
Okay.
And where does that come from their ingestion point, right? And then we also have to be concerned about data in transit, right? So is it actually done with the data clear? They're on site. When it gets into its reverse logistics facility, which are typically around Dallas area, right? Do they do a secondary wipe where they actually capture all the asset information? They also make sure, like, did Alex leave his FMIP on, right? Is there an MDM or DEP lock on there from the company,
Mhm.
right? Making sure that all those different locks and intelligence are removed so it can actually move into the secondary economy. And then have you done a data clear, or are you looking for something a little bit more robust? Are you in healthcare? Are you in finance, right? Are you federal? Well,
Yeah.
perhaps you actually want a NIST purge where you're going to do an algorithmic overwrite of all the user accessible data to ensure that, you know, Verizon isn't going to have a blowback because all of a sudden Alex finds his information out there on the dark web and
Right.
he's like, wait a second, I turned this into Verizon. How is my data out there? Well, they can actually say, hey, here's the audit trail, here's the data erasure report, right? Here's all the asset information, here's the state of the device. And they also understand where it then flows, into the secondary economy, right? Are they going to put it now? That's the beautiful thing is you used to only see new devices going in stores, right? And these days you'll have certified pre-owned, where they will use tools like ours and some others that are out there to process these phones. And then you'll also use vision and grading, these days AI, to actually take a look at the surface areas and understand like, are there scratches? Are there defects? What actually needs to be addressed here? So that's going to be taken out. And if you've ever dropped a phone, have you ever bought the insurance for a phone?
Yes.
Not as much these days because they're a lot more sturdy, but have you dropped it with the glass and been like, I need to actually get a replacement?
Yeah, I've shattered a screen before. Yeah.
And we can go into the repair stores. But sometimes if you're dealing with like an AT&T, Verizon,
Yeah.
or T-Mobile, they're using the primary insurance companies of Assurian and Assurance,
Assyrian. Yep.
right? So these things will flow into Tennessee. And by the
Mhm.
way, the processors on these are processing millions, sometimes tens of millions of these devices a year.
Mhm.
So how do they operationalize this at scale? But if you got that phone back, it looks like a brand new phone when they
Mhm.
replaced it. Well, that has been a phone that's come through secondary channels, for any number of reasons. So they'll replace the glass. They will do a buff and polish, right? They will do all these different things that are called refurbishment to uplift that asset. So when you see it, you're like, wow, they sent me a brand new phone. I
Mhm.
can't even tell. But that is typically a secondary phone that came through just like when you broke it, and you probably did some scratches and everything on it. So maybe they're actually replacing the back, replacing the glass, right? Or can they just do a buff polish that will actually take it down the surface so you can no longer even see it? So it looks like you got a brand new device. So it is a fascinating thing to kind of understand where these things flow. And the thing that I would encourage this audience is I'm even looking behind you, right, where you have the beautiful New York skyline,
Yeah.
right? When you think about the magnitude, think of all those buildings back there. Think of all the technology that's in
Yeah.
every one of those, right? And think about that at scale. And when each one of those pieces is turned in, how does it actually get processed and handled, right? So we as consumers can be confident, so that our companies can be confident. And ultimately, then how does it get redeployed? That's the magnitudes that we're talking about. And you have massive third-party logistics, companies. And by the way, actually, I don't know if I'm going to go, but reverse logistics is so huge these days, right? Like, so Amazon's got Amazon Renewed these days, right? Um, but there's going to be a big trade show in New York the
Hmm.
second week of January, the 11th and 12th, called NRF Reverse.
Yep.
And it's really focused on this whole return economy and how you handle these things. Um, so again, it is actually embedding yourselves into the entire reverse logistics process. It can be carriers, it can be 3PLs, it can be the e-commerce sites like Amazon Renewed. Walmart's coming into this huge. And again, all the people that are processing these things at scale. Um, so yeah, it's quite interesting. And how do you actually ingratiate yourselves with them and really educate the world and create confidence in the assets that are coming back out? And obviously, it goes beyond just data sanitization. You have to look into the diagnostics and functionality of that phone, right? As well as make sure there aren't locks, right? Does this thing go out there and the consumer can no longer access it because 30 days from now, their carrier bill wasn't paid on that one that they took a 24-month, installment plan out.
Hmm.
So the other carrier just locked it. That's not a good consumer experience. How do you create visibility and transparency there?
Right. No, I mean, really interesting. I mean, you mentioning education multiple times, right? And so how are you educating these companies to even explain to them that they need to do this and they should be doing this? How are you getting these clients?
Yeah, so I think that's interesting. Part of it is engagements like this,
Yeah.
is going out there and share my own experience,
Hmm.
right? This isn't anything that I saw. Like, it was awareness that punched me in the face
Right.
because I had to look at it, and that's the one thing that I would, compel you and this entire audience to say is, wow, I never really thought about that. It's just
I
kind of
mean,
that selective attention and awareness. And I speak at different events,
yeah.
right? So, whether it is ITAD, which stands for IT Asset Disposition, is part of this industry and a whole thing that's built around it. So speaking at ITAD events or going into, carrier events, being part of trade groups and really just engaging in thought leadership discussions, because again,
Mhm.
the magnitude of this isn't anything I'm going to solve on my own, right?
Yeah.
Who are people that can come together? How do I start working with the OEMs directly? So engaging with Google, Apple, Samsung. Apple and Samsung are two of our biggest customers,
Hmm.
right now, right? Google and kind of what they're doing. And what you're starting to see is all of them are starting to take on circularity, and sustainability can be kind of an ugly term these days, right? But sustainability is no longer just the chief sustainability officer. It's actually become a part of business continuity and risk management that is flowing into all aspects of the business,
Hmm.
right? To ensure that they have supply chain integrity, right? How do we have closed loop systems, ensure business continuity, and with what's going on in the current world, right? Is how do we manage the stuff at its end of life and create supply chain resiliency? So it's just conversations,
Yeah.
right? Share my story and, hopefully piques interest, such as in yourself.
I
And you
mean,
just look
all
around and you're like,
all I'm
wow,
thinking of is how many offices I've been in and these IT rooms I've been in with just closets and closets of storage of old computers, old keyboards, mouses. It's just old technology, old servers. It's incredible. And a lot of this is sitting there rotting, and I know some of it can be of use, right?
yeah,
But and like you said, all the buildings around here, right? I mean, I have a background in commercial real estate, and it's really fascinating just talking to you because it's something I've actually it's not on the forefront, right? It's not exactly out there in mainstream and everyone's thinking about this, but it actually makes a ton of sense. It makes a ton of sense what you're
Yeah.
doing.
It's one of those things that you need punched in the face of, right?
Yeah.
Because it is so easy to be unconscious. Look, there's a million things I'm still unconscious of, right? I was
Yeah.
forced to look at this, and once you look at it, you're just like, so now you have that awareness. And every piece of technology that you see now, you're like, right? And to be
Exactly.
honest,
I'm
some of
going to
that
look at
older
everything
technology,
differently now.
you should, and honestly, that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And to have you talking about it, right, is it's just that awareness and how can we spread it? And it's
Right.
funny when you kind of say that older technology because people's like, oh, that stuff's the worst, right? Well, guess what? The amount of rare earths and precious metals in older technology, because they weren't advanced, right? There is a lot of value reclamation in there. And by the way, that's what we didn't get into is yes, at some point in time, you're not going to enable this into the circular economy, right?
Mhm.
So at what point do you understand all these different factors to say now is the time to go ahead and recycle this? And what does recycling look like,
Mhm.
right? And how do you actually get out that precious metal, the gold, the palladium, the silver, you name it, and actually then have it in a purified stance or position that you have elemental traceability of that, right? And how can you actually bring that back into supply chains? That is something that is still, really new here in the US because typically, and that's why China doesn't care if they're actually mining all over the world, right? And by the way, for a little geopolitical impact, I always find it fascinating because we hear so much about batteries, EVs, and everything these
Yeah.
days, right? Phones, all of our technology. Well, almost all that cobalt is coming out of China or is coming out of the Congo. And by the way, those mines in the Congo are owned by China and it is the Wagner Group out of Russia that is running security on those. So it doesn't matter if China's taken out of the ground, or by the way, if they are actually getting our recycling and send it back to China for the refining, because they will use hundreds and thousands of passes of kerosene and jet fuel to reduce it to its elemental state. And of course, that's not going to fly over here. So what you're seeing is new innovation that's transpiring. Can we use immobilized proteins, right, to go ahead and isolate these things? So hydrometallurgical processes. And that is actually a really, really interesting thing to see is because most people, when they talk about recycling, they know about as much as that blue bin that's out in your front
Yeah.
that you put your Tide, plastic
Yeah.
in. They're like out of sight, out of mind. Well, you have to continue taking this all the way down to literally its final state. So I continue to have aha moments in this.
Mhm.
And who are the innovators that can actually enable this? And can you get it in a purified state where it truly can be reintroduced into closed loop systems? Now you're building a supply chain that is resilient, right?
No, I mean that makes perfect sense. I mean, this has been extremely fascinating and definitely woke me up to on this topic. I mean, I guess if you could wave a magic wand right now, like, what would you try to fix, or
Hmm.
what would help you?
I think if I can wave a magic wand, it's really the evolution of this industry and awareness, right? It would to be make the entire world conscious, I guess, especially
Yeah.
first worlds
Yeah.
conscious of this, because I think when you look at this, you are driven to have change or to be responsible, right?
Mhm.
Because you have to start looking at the overall impact. So again, I don't care if you're an environmental, person, like I
Sure.
do, right? But
Sure.
if environmentals, what motivates you? Huge environmental implications. But guess what? Maybe you're just a patriot that cares about national security, and you're like, all right, well, our advanced planes, our satellites, everything that we do requires, the raw materials to actually build these things. So the first thing I have to do is just be responsible and get these things reintroduced in the supply chains. But also, it comes down to actually working with the OEMs, right? Is how do we design these things more effectively so they can be reintroduced into the
Right.
circular economy? And you're starting to see kind of a reluctant shift happening there because it used to be where they were afraid because they're like, I don't want to cannibalize new sales, right? So I want to make this very difficult to actually come back into the circular economy. Well, that is shifting. And the way that I would kind of correlate it is just like cars, right? In the early days, I'm sure they were like, I don't want to sell used cars because the fact that that takes away from new cars.
Mhm.
Well, that's not where we're at today. And we have to kind of look at all these. So again, once again, it's awareness and there is a secondary economy for these things. So how do OEMs actually support that secondary economy, the circularity, and by also enabling the public to be educated, right? How do we actually have a groundswell of demand from the public saying, hey, Apple, Google, Samsung, HP, Lenovo, all you people that are out there that are producing high volumes of technology, I need you to be conscious in the way that you do this because of the impact and implications,
Yeah.
right? So we need to be smart. And again, it comes also down to supply chain resiliency. We saw earlier, summer last year, where the entire automobile industry was severely impacted by the limitation of rare earths that were coming out of China based on what's going on the geopolitical stage, right? So there's so many implications, for it. And again, I think it starts with responsible design and willing to have people come to the same table and sit down as stakeholders and say, all right, let's look at this thing holistically and not just what's my profit lever at the end, right?
Mhm.
There's a part of that,
Right.
right? But it is really coming into that C-suite discussion and saying, let's look at this and the implications, the impact. And by the way, it's our global brand at stake. And how can we lean into that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, you make an amazing point. I mean, listen, Andrew, I really appreciate it. This has been great. What we want to focus on here is what we do with our e-waste. How do we be socially responsible, and how do we work together to help these other countries also who maybe be second, third world that need and can use this technology. I mean, I think that just makes such a great point and argument for what you're doing here.
Yeah, well, and there's an entire ecosystem that needs to be developed. So in
Hmm.
addition to my role as co-founder of CypherBlk, I'm also part of the Powered by Apkudo ecosystem, which is an enabler. And I'm the executive vice president of ecosystem development there. So being from the software side, information drives everything, right? Which means API integrations, right? How do we actually enable the world to bring in all the data sets, intelligence, visibility to allow these things to happen? So again, this isn't going to be me and a silo saying, I'm going to solve this and I'll build all these things. Impossible, right? It's how
Right.
do I get to work, with the various companies and people and understand this and bring data and insights, API integrations coming in as well as going out that really allows this type of economy to happen.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for joining. I think we have to have another conversation. I feel like there's a lot more to talk about, but
I would love to.
yeah, for sure. So where can the guests find you and your company?
Yeah, so certainly appreciate it. So my company is CypherBlk,
Yeah.
and it's spelled CYPHERBLK.
Mhm.
And that was a riff that I did on Cypher being code, Black trying to be Black Ops, because we really evolved trying to actually solve challenges that others could not in our industry,
Mhm.
right? And that was the genesis of our company and how we enable with these people. So you can find me on LinkedIn, right? Andrew Kroeger. And our company CypherBlk is going to be part of the Apkudo. So if you go to Apkudo,
Mhm.
APKUDO.com, that is actually part of the ecosystem that we're now part of. That's really enabling the circular economy. So, but yeah, I would love for people to reach out, especially as we get to kind of engage with other industries.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because we all have a role here, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we all have our part. I feel like just speaking when I'm outside in the world, just talking to people now about something like this is just this little domino effect. Every little bit makes a difference.
Yeah. And the beautiful part is, look, we've got AI these days.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to learn about this in short order? Ping ChatGPT,
Yeah.
right? Claude, whatever, and just say, hey, I want to learn more about this and the implications. And you will fall quickly down a rabbit hole
Yeah.
and the aha moments that you have. But conversely, please reach out to me. To
Yeah.
you, your guests, it's something that I'm passionate about, right? And I
Yeah.
want to solve problems. And again, whether it's our solutions or working with others, that's really the goal.
Your energy really shows and your passion shows, man. I'm going to put those links here below the video for everyone and have a great rest of your day.
Cool. Alex, thank you. We'll see you
Thanks.
soon.